Insulin resistance. What is it? What can you do about it? How can you avoid it? We have an expert here to talk about it. I'm Dr. Paul Zalza.
I'm Dr. Brad Wing. How sweet the sound. Welcome, Dr. Amanda Maroney, Lifestyle Medicine. You've known her from before. She's done great videos with us. This is a really critical topic. Thank you so much for coming.
I am, honestly, this is one of my favorite topics.
It's your passion.
It is. And especially this particular topic, because when I've taught this in, to patients, when I've taught groups on insulin resistance, I see the light bulbs go off, and I just love this particular lesson. I'm gonna, try to do it in a way that your viewers can have fun with.
All power outages aside, you have a clinic though, right? Don't you have a clinic where you teach lifestyle medicine to people?
Well, we are just launching a clinic.
It's
going
amazing.
to, we're just in the process of recruiting, patients who are interested in lifestyle medicine. It's a private lifestyle medicine clinic. It's called Optimal U, like optimal letter U.
Perfect.
And yeah, we have a website you can visit and then talk to our team if you're interested in something like this.
Hamza, we'll put a link in the description. All right,
Awesome.
so
Insulin
lay it on
resistance.
us.
All right, so I think when I've explained insulin resistance to patients, I usually start with kind of what normally happens. But just as a baseline example of or a description of what insulin resistance is, it's basically when your body is resistant to insulin.
Okay.
Where'd they get the name?
I know.
Okay,
Fancy.
well, I have a confession. Because I don't want to lie in a bed of lies here.
I like it.
Last
Confessional.
night, I was on call and I ate half a chocolate bar. I needed to pick me up. I had to come back in to operate.
Okay.
It was a Twix. I ate one of the Twix. There's two Twix.
Who is able to stop at just one
I ate
bar
just
of
one.
the Twix?
I ate the Twix.
You should be awarded
The
a
Twix,
medal.
You left the
A
X.
Twix.
Yeah, and
This is no judgment space here.
I know,
Safe
I'm not.
space. Safe space.
If
my
I'm
friend.
being fully honest,
You had the second.
I'm probably gonna eat the second half tonight. But I need a strategy. I need a
Okay.
strategy from you at the end of this video. How could I not eat that second Twix? Because it's sitting in the cupboard. I know exactly where it is. The package is open already.
Yes, it's gonna go bad. And just wait, if you have a confession, if you have a guilty pleasure that maybe you know is not a healthy choice and may be leading to insulin resistance or troubles like this, please share it in the comments.
God,
okay,
I love the
here we go.
Twix. It's
Okay,
the Twix.
so I think it helps to understand what happens normally in the body first, because when you know what's normal in the body and how glucose is metabolized when you consume glucose, it's easier to understand then what goes wrong and then why what I'm going to recommend makes sense. Like, I just want things to make sense, because when they make sense to my patients, then they're more likely to say, okay, this is something I understand what the treatment's about and why it's happening. So normally when I explain this, I'm teaching in front of a group, I'm drawing things on the board, on a whiteboard. We don't have, I think the hospital would not like me drawing on this
Definitely
board.
not.
So I have actually decided to make a live model.
All right.
I just need 2 volunteers.
I will.
Yeah, I will.
Yay. Oh, that's amazing.
Is it okay that Paul had the Twix though? Should he maybe not be involved in this part?
half the Twix.
It's okay.
Okay.
It's okay. So I need, I'm going to be the pancreas.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm the pancreas.
So
I love
awesome.
it.
The beta cell specifically. Would you like to be the muscle or the liver?
Muscle.
I know. I thought you'd say the muscle.
I knew
Right?
you'd say
So
that.
we've
I don't
got-
even need a sign.
So you're the liver.
You're so predictable,
even-
Zao Zao. Hey,
All right.
Take it easy over there, liver lips.
Okay.
Okay.
So we've got Paul's our muscle cell, Brad's our liver,
Okay.
I'm the pancreas. Now, before I go into what happens in these particular cells and organs, we need to introduce 2 other players here. We've got glucose. So what is glucose? I've mentioned this a few times. Glucose is a molecule that our body, it's the body's primary fuel, right? So this is like gas for a car, right?
C6H12O6.
It's very impressive.
Amazing.
Oh, it's nice.
Okay. Glucose.
Twix powered.
C6H6
H12.
H12O6. I missed that biochemistry lesson. Anyhow, glucose is a primary fuel. And how do you get glucose into your body? You get it through consuming carbohydrates typically, right? So carbohydrates are the main source of glucose, and there's different types of carbohydrates, right? You probably have talked about this before on your show at some point.
Yeah.
So we've got
Simple, complex.
Simple, complex,
Twix.
right? So simple carbs are basically have been stripped of any fiber. They're typically, processed in some way, and they're basically just groups of glucose molecules that are lined up very simply, so that when they enter the digestive system, they're broken up into these individual cells for quick use, right? So they're very easily broken down. Versus complex carbohydrates are clusters of glucose, that are also intertwined, usually with fiber. They're more slowly broken down by the body and released more slowly.
And they're often whole foods.
And they're
Real
found in
whole
whole
foods.
foods. So
Yes.
whole carbohydrates include beans, they include any vegetable, any fruit, whole grains. These are great sources of complex, healthy carbohydrates.
Not so much the Twix bar.
Sorry. Cannot, yeah.
Sorry,
Twix is
Sal.
more of the simple kind.
Right.
So that's glucose. And then we have insulin.
The
so
big I.
The big I.
Okay.
The big I in the sky. So insulin is the hormone that your body releases in order to utilize glucose in your body. So except for the brain is like the hoarder of the glucose. It is your master control center. It needs a lot of energy, and its primary source of fuel is glucose. So it just crosses the blood-brain barrier and it gets absorbed. There's no special, it does not need insulin to absorb.
And this is protective for us, right?
Absolutely.
So if you're in a crisis and need energy in your brain can be like, okay, where's the insulin at?
Yeah,
We got to
yeah.
activate the receptor, and then we
Yeah.
got
Protect the brain.
We
Exactly.
just straight to it.
Okay. So we now we've got insulin. Insulin is a hormone. It's released by the beta cells of the pancreas, so the head of the pancreas. Okay, that's me. And then, so we're going to pretend that this is the bloodstream here. Okay. So what normally happens when you consume a banana, carbohydrate, gets broken down into glucose molecules. The glucose molecules are floating in the blood, and your body detects the sugar or the blood sugar or the glucose going up, and so it signals to the pancreas, hey there, I got glucose in here. I'm sure there's some cells that need it. So it signals to the pancreas to secrete insulin.
Okay.
Now, insulin can't, so glucose can't just get into the cell. So let's just look at Paul. Paul's head is going to be our insulin receptor. A receptor is basically what the insulin binds to open things up for the cell.
Right.
And I want to put your hands like this. This is your transport channel for the glucose.
Got it.
So normally blood glucose enters, and we've got the insulin secreted. It binds to the receptor,
Yeah.
and then sends a bunch of signals through the muscle cell, and the glucose transport channel opens up, and the sugar can get in, and it either gets used right away by the muscle cell or gets stored away as something called glycogen.
Right there.
For later.
Baby, check out the pipes.
Like it, yeah.
Nice, I like that.
Fancy, yeah. And then as this happens, the blood sugar level, the blood glucose level goes down, and then the pancreas is no longer signaled, and the insulin basically just falls off. And when it does, the transport channel closes. So the resting state of the muscle is not to have sugar just flowing in all the time. That's just too overwhelming. It stays closed unless triggered by insulin.
Okay.
That's normal. Also, what happens normally is what's happening in the liver. The liver is a big key player in how glucose is produced.
It's pretty important.
It's super important.
Fitting kind of that I actually had the liver, maybe.
Sure, yes, fair. Although the
You
pancreas.
can always transplant
Yeah.
a new liver if we need it.
So what normally happens in the liver is responsible for making sugar through a process called gluconeogenesis. That's a Scrabble word you should keep in your back pocket.
I like it.
Gluconeogenesis. I'll give you a few more Scrabble words later.
Yeah.
But so the liver's responsibility is to make glucose when there's no carbohydrate, no glucose in the blood. You're not consuming. So between meals, for example, because remember, the brain needs sugar, needs glucose all the time to function properly. So when in normal situations between meals, when there's no glucose around, what happens is the liver is constantly making its own glucose from amino acids and other compounds, not from carbohydrates. So it's making its own, so you can just hold this glucose here. That's its normal job. When you eat something with glucose and it enters the bloodstream, insulin is again secreted, it's gone to the muscle already, but it also then binds to the receptors in the liver. And it has an opposite effect. It stops the production of glucose. Why? Because it's the body's way of saying, hey, guys, I'm good. I've got a source right now. Liver, take a break. You don't need to make any more glucose anymore for me. We got you covered. So the liver shuts it down until that blood glucose gets used up, the levels drop again, insulin falls off, and then the liver starts making its glucose again.
Okay.
So that's normal. This is what happens in
That's
a
a
normal
process.
person. Right. So then what happens in insulin resistance? So I mentioned very kind of tongue-in-cheek that insulin resistance is when the body is resistant to insulin. But what that means is there's something getting in the way of that signal, specifically in the muscle cells. And that something is actually might surprise you. A lot of people think it's about sugar. I'm eating a lot of sugar. And sugar and refined carbohydrates do overload the system. It floods the system. It makes the pancreas squirt out a lot of insulin. So that is part of the key factor. But the actual factor is saturated fat. Saturated fat. Fat that you also wear in your body. So, central obesity, when you have a lot of fat that's in close to your organs, that's called visceral fat, and saturated fat in your diet. So saturated fat in your diet, and we'll talk about where we find that.
Okay.
Actually, I'll just say it now. So saturated fat is typically found in processed foods, right? So your Twix bar counts.
Yep.
Sorry. Saturated fat also happens in natural foods like, red meats, non-lean cuts of meat. It also occurs in butter. It's very high prevalent in, a lot of our dairy products. So cheese is 70% saturated fat. Eggs have some saturated fat, also have some polyunsaturated fat as well. And just for note, this doesn't happen. Polyunsaturated fats, these healthy fats, omega-6, omega-3, do not cause insulin resistance. So they're not the issue. It's just saturated fat.
The chicken wing?
The chicken wing. So to model this, what happens then in the new model is that saturated fat gets into the muscle cells. Now, I'm putting it on top of the receptor. It actually is in the muscle cells. That's called intramyocellular fat. That's another Scrabble word. Keep that in your back pocket.
Okay. It's too big for my back pocket.
Too bad in your back pocket.
You make that have a goods out of it.
So when that happens, you're going to get one too.
Okay.
So
I like cocoa beans.
So what happens is
I was thinking more like Mrs. Doubtfire.
Shall I speak an English accent for the rest of it? So glucose gets into the system like we talked about before. You've eaten something with carbohydrate. Glucose is into the system. Pancreas is triggered, and all of a sudden the insulin cannot bind. The cells, the muscle cells are resistant. So what happens? That channel is staying closed. So the sugar is just trying to get in. It can't get in. It stays in the blood, and then your blood glucose rises. Okay. At the same time, when this is happening, the fat can also accumulate in your liver. You get one too.
There you go, Miss Daisy.
So fat in the liver.
Right.
We see it as fatty liver disease, right? Fatty liver disease is a precursor to diabetes.
Yes.
It's a precursor to insulin resistance. Why? Because remember, the job of the insulin is to stop the production of glucose when we have glucose in our bloodstream because we've eaten it. So we have eaten blood glucose, the insulin can no longer bind, so the liver just keeps doing its thing. It's now pumping out even more sugar. Yep. So when you pump out more glucose, I'm using glucose and sugar interchangeably for the sake of the discussion, but when you're pumping out more and more glucose, the blood sugar level rises, and it's saying, hey, pancreas, do something about this. So the pancreas starts to squirt out more and more and more insulin, and insulin also causes you to store more fat.
There you go.
In your muscles. So then you're making the process even worse. And I have to point on to even the pancreas over time can get infiltrated.
I don't think I knew that.
Can get infiltrated.
Fatty pancreas even.
And yes, and so what happens is it also destroys your beta cells, which are producing the insulin in the first place.
What a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle. So that's what happens in insulin resistance. So
tell me that there's some hope.
Absolutely, because think about it. Remember, lifestyle medicine, which is my thing, what I practice, lifestyle medicine is about root causes. So if saturated fat is the root cause, then what's the root solution?
Probably get rid of the saturated fat.
Ding, 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 ding. Correctamundo. So getting rid of the saturated fat from your diet, obviously, losing some of the central fat that you're storing as well helps. So find the sources of saturated fat in your diet, which we've talked about, right? Butter, cheese, heavy animal processed foods, right? Yes. All the cakes, all the cookies, all the chicken wings, all the things that you're going to hate me for saying.
Twix bars. Sorry, Twix.
Twix bars.
Hang on one sec. Hi, honey. Can you throw away that second half of the Twix bar? Thank you. I love you too.
So just for our viewers, because they're going to hear saturated fat, they're going to be like, okay, so all my sugary snacks are okay, so sugar's not a problem?
Right.
Just to be clear.
If you have insulin resistance, sugar is a big problem, right? So you've got insulin resistance, so no matter, any carbohydrate will actually elevate your blood sugars. But remember that part of the process is also when you're eating those refined carbs, you're flooding your system with these massive amounts of glucose on top of insulin resistance. It's a recipe for disaster. So you still do need to, eliminate refined sugars from your diet.
It's
as
just
well.
less likely to be the cause necessarily. It's only going to aggravate it.
So
Though.
the refined, exactly.
Yeah.
It's the insulin resistance is the issue, and when you start to, so what happens is when you start to reduce the saturated fat in your diet quite quickly, and I have seen it work within days.
Okay.
The saturated fat starts to melt away, right? And the insulin starts to work again. The glucose channels open. And so on this note, I do want to say, if you're saying, wow, I didn't know this, I'm going to try this. I'm going to eliminate all sources of saturated fat from my diet, and you are on medication for diabetes, or you're taking insulin for diabetes, please, please, please work with your physician. Check your blood sugars more frequently, at least 4 times a day, because I literally have seen, when people remove saturated fats, their sugars drop to low levels within days. And that's good news because it means that perhaps your medications can be adjusted, but you have to work with your doctor, let them know that you're trying this, and please monitor your blood sugar. I just want to keep your
Because
viewers...
hypoglycemia is dangerous.
Hyperglycemia is dangerous.
Life-threatening.
Too low blood sugar is very dangerous for
Because now
the
you're
immune system.
over-treating.
Exactly. So keep a close eye on your blood sugars, but know that this can work pretty quickly.
Wow.
So that's insulin resistance. And a question kind of arises then, what about keto? Well then, why are my blood sugars getting better with a high fat, low carb diet?
Right.
So let's think about this. So in keto or in any kind of low carb diet, you're basically just never exposing yourself to carbohydrates.
Right.
But you're eating high fat, typically high saturated fats. So what's happening is, can I see your hat? Can I see your hat?
Yeah.
You're actually you're double timing your saturated fat. You're actually making your insulin resistance worse. So the reason why your sugars look so great is because you're never being exposed to glucose in the first place.
Okay.
So an analogy to this is it's like a person who is deaf saying, I'm going to put you in a silent room. I'm never going to expose you to sound. And now you're cured.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You're still deaf. You're just never exposed to, right? So if you're never exposed to glucose, your sugars are going to look great. Your A1C is going to go down. But as soon as you eat a banana, which is a completely normal, healthy source of fuel and carbohydrates, your sugar shoots up.
Wait. So I'm true keto. I'm never eating a banana.
Well, you
Right.
might eventually.
So what if I literally never ever, just to play the devil's advocate, what if I was like, I'm never going to touch another simple or complex carbohydrate in my life?
Yeah, so you probably actually, your insulin resistance will be terrible. So at any point, if you do consume a carbohydrate,
It's through the roof.
your sugar's going through the roof. And goodness knows if you're going to ever be able to undo that damage that you've done to your insulin receptors.
Yeah.
But in a second, we know now with studies that, long-term ketogenic diets, they're actually not healthy. They don't improve mortality. And from a cardiovascular point of view, saturated fat also really affects the blood, the blood vessels and your heart. So you are also increasing your cholesterol. You're increasing your heart disease risk. So
in the short term, your blood sugars and your A1C look okay,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily an accurate or valid picture of your general health.
yeah, and if you did decide not to be keto anymore,
Look out.
you kind of pooched yourself because you're going to be so far gone. Because you've layered so much saturated fat into your muscle cells and your pancreas and your liver. It's going to be quite hard for your body to recover.
And sometimes I was going to say it's fat that you can't even see. So it's not like you're like, well, actually, I'm a healthy weight. I lost a whole bunch of weight. The fat is on the inside, and we've done videos about this before. How that visceral fat is a little bit sneaky, and only it's maybe 1 or 2 kilos, but it's in a really bad spot and really changes your baseline levels of inflammation and just your general health.
And it's funny how historically the keto diet was treatment for diabetes before we had all the elegant treatments we have now. That was where it came from, a ketogenic diet to treat diabetes, just to bring the sugars down. But at the end of the day, you're not really treating the problem.
Yeah, I would absolutely not recommend a keto diet for treating diabetes myself personally. So that's right. And also, I just want to shout out to Canada's Food Guide because Canada's Food Guide is a great way. So maybe in this video you could have a posting of Canada's Food Guide so we can see it. It was updated in 2019. If you followed that guideline, you will be fine, because 3/4 of your plate are carbohydrates, but they're complex carbs, right? Coming from whole grains, lots of fruits and vegetables, starchy potatoes. Like when I introduced this to patients and they said, so you're telling me I just eliminate the saturated fat in the diet, I can still eat nuts and seeds and I can still eat avocados. I'm like, yes, that's not the issue. That's not causing the problem. It's saturated fat, the stuff that's hard at room temperature. It's the stuff that's in your meat, lining your meat, right? It's your butter, right? So you can have all the potatoes you want.
Yeah.
You could have white rice. Look at Japan. Japan is a great example of this. Japanese people, rural Japanese people, have very, very low rates of diabetes, yet they're eating white rice. And people are like, well, that's a conundrum. It's not a conundrum when you understand what the root cause of insulin resistance is. Right. They have diets very low in saturated fat. They are unprocessed. I'm talking about rural Japan. Unfortunately, because of the industrialization, we're seeing a shift in that population, and now we're seeing more diabetes because of that. But they could eat as much white rice, but they also have lots of fruits and vegetables. They have lots of fiber. They have polyunsaturated fats, in the ways of fish.
And very small sources of
very
protein.
Small amounts of protein. And so their diet, they have very low rates of diabetes because there's no fat.
Right.
That's plugging the system.
There you go. Wow.
Isn't that cool?
It is cool.
You know honestly, leave a comment if you appreciate Dr. Maroney's passion for insulin resistance. Wow.
Can we mention the book? If you want to learn more about this and really get into the nuts and bolts, this is one book I'd highly recommend. I have no affiliation with the authors of this book. It's called Mastering Diabetes. Another great resource is by Dr. Neil Barnard, who wrote He wrote the program for reversing diabetes.
We'll put links in the description.
Yeah, it actually goes through all of this. It has pictures. It doesn't use our live. I think we should take this live model on the road.
This is really.
But it will explain things in more detail. It also has some recipes. And just get yourself informed, because you've probably been told, if you have diabetes, you've been told a lot that carbs are the enemy. And while certain carbs can be the enemy, complex carbs are the bomb. And it's actually, when it comes to insulin resistance,
wow,
it's great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right, guys, there you have it.
Now you know the skinny on insulin resistance.
Hey.
And a roll of fat.
That's right. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe to our channel, share it with someone they think that would benefit from this, or maybe someone that's not quite sure what insulin resistance is.
Dr. Maroney, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Remember, you are in charge of your own health.
We'll see you next time.